Have you ever met a neighbor so arrogant that he thought the world revolved around him? Well, this story is about one, and how his arrogance led him straight into the most humiliating mistake of his life. This is Smile and Scars, and today we bring you a story that reminds us, never judge someone by appearances, especially when that someone happens to be Steven Seagal. It was a quiet Sunday morning in a calm suburban neighborhood. The sound of birds, the smell of fresh coffee, the soft hum of lawnmowers in the distance, everything felt peaceful. Steven Seagal, now living a quiet life away from Hollywood lights and chaos, had just moved into his new home on the outskirts of Los Angeles. He'd bought this place for one reason: peace. After decades of movies, interviews, and martial arts exhibitions, he craved silence. But peace is something that arrogant people rarely allow others to have. Across the fence lived a man named Rick Dalton, a proud, loud, and self-absorbed man in his early 40s. Rick had money, a big mouth, and an even bigger ego. He was the kind of neighbor who revved his car engine early in the morning, threw loud parties at night, and believed every argument had to end with his victory. From day one, Rick didn't like Steven. He saw him carrying boxes, calm and silent, never saying much, and to someone like Rick, silence meant weakness. He'd seen Steven's name on the mailbox, Seagal, but it didn't click. He thought it was some coincidence or maybe just a wannabe fan of the famous actor. One morning, as Steven was trimming the bonsai trees in his front yard, Rick stormed over. "Hey, old man," Rick shouted. "You mind not letting your dog poop near my fence?" Steven looked up slowly, calm as ever. "I don't have a dog," he said in a gentle voice. Rick smirked, stepping closer. "Yeah, well, maybe you should learn to keep your yard clean then. I've seen things that don't belong on my side." Steven didn't react. He just nodded. "All right, I'll take a look." But that calm response only made Rick angrier. He wanted confrontation. He wanted dominance. For days, Rick kept pushing small arguments, blocking Steven's driveway, blasting loud music at night, and even tossing trash near his yard. Steven ignored him, focusing on his meditation and early morning martial arts practice in the backyard. Then, one evening, things escalated. Steven was sitting on his porch, sipping green tea, when Rick stumbled over clearly drunk after one of his parties. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Rick slurred, pointing his finger. "You think because you sit there all quiet that you're some kind of saint." Steven set his cup down slowly. "No," he said calmly. "I just believe peace is better than anger." That sentence hit Rick like an insult. His pride flared. "Peace, huh? You wanna see peace?" He sneered, and before Steven could move, Rick swung his fist, landing a punch straight to Steven Seagal's face. The sound was sharp. A few of Rick's friends who were outside gasped, but what happened next froze everyone in their tracks. Steven didn't even flinch. He slowly turned his head back toward Rick, eyes calm, almost too calm. The kind of calm that only comes before a storm. Rick blinked, confused. "What? What are you made of?" he stammered. Steven rose from his chair. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply stood tall, centered, unshaken. "You've made a mistake," he said in a low tone. Rick laughed nervously, but before he could say another word, Steven moved, not fast, not flashy, but precise. In one smooth motion, he grabbed Rick's wrist, twisted it effortlessly, and guided him straight to the ground with an aikido throw so quick that no one saw it happen. Rick's body hit the dirt before his brain caught up. His friends rushed over, but Steven just stepped back. "You should take him home," he said, his voice still even, "before he hurts himself again." Rick was humiliated, but his pride wasn't done. He couldn't accept that this quiet man next door had just made him look weak in front of everyone. The next morning, Steven found a deep scratch on his car door and a smashed flower pot near his driveway. He didn't need to guess who was behind it. He just sighed and went back to his tea. But Rick wasn't finished. That afternoon, he showed up again, sober this time, but angrier. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my friends?" he barked. "You think I'm scared of you, old man?" Steven didn't reply. He simply looked at him, his expression unreadable. That silence, that unbothered calm, drove Rick insane. He lunged again, this time with a wild punch aimed at Steven's chest. but Seagal sidestepped with effortless grace, guiding Rick's arm away with a small circular motion. In an instant, Rick was off balance, and Steven placed a hand on his shoulder, pressing him gently to his knees. Rick groaned. "What? What are you doing?" "I'm teaching you balance," Steven said softly. "And respect." That's when Rick's wife came running out, shouting his name. She'd seen everything from the window, the punch, the fall, and her husband's humiliation. "Rick, stop this," she yelled. "You don't know who he is." Rick froze. "What are you talking about?" She held up her phone. She'd just looked it up. "That's Steven Seagal," she shouted. The Steven Seagal, the martial arts legend. Rick's face drained of color. He looked up slowly, realizing what he'd done. The same man he'd punched, the same neighbor he'd mocked, was one of the greatest martial artists on earth. Steven sighed. "It doesn't matter," he said quietly. "What matters is how you treat people." He helped Rick up, dusting him off as if nothing had happened. "Go home, be better than this." But Rick couldn't speak. He was too stunned and too ashamed. His arrogance had met its end in the most humiliating way possible. That night, Rick sat on his porch, watching Steven practice his Aikido moves under the moonlight. Every motion was fluid, silent, and beautiful, a reminder that true power doesn't need to shout. For the first time, Rick felt small. Not weak, but small enough to understand that he'd been living life wrong. And that's when it hit him. He didn't just punch a neighbor. He punched a legend and learned the greatest lesson of his life. But this story doesn't end here, Janny. Because the very next day, something happened that would test Steven Seagal's patience, power, and forgiveness more than ever before. And this time, the whole neighborhood would be watching. The next morning, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The sun had barely risen, but something felt heavy in the air. Rick hadn't slept all night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look on Steven Seagal's calm face, not angry, not proud, just calm. That was worse than rage. It made Rick question everything about himself. But sometimes arrogance doesn't die in one day. It hides, waits, and whispers. And for Rick, that whisper came back when his friends arrived that morning, laughing, replaying videos from last night on their phones. "Man, you really went at him," one said, chuckling. "You punched that old guy like he was made of glass." Rick tried to smile, but his stomach turned. "Yeah, except that old guy Steven Seagal," he said quietly. The laughter stopped. "No way," one friend said, frowning. "You're lying." Rick shook his head. "Look him up," he muttered. They did. And as the names, photos, and martial arts videos came up on their screens, their faces fell. "Oh man," one whispered. "You punched him. You're lucky to still be breathing." Rick stood up, rubbing his temples. "I've gotta fix this." Meanwhile, across the fence, Steven was sweeping his porch, the morning light glinting off his calm expression. He had already moved on. To him, yesterday was just another moment, a test of patience, a chance to stay centered. But fate had other plans. Rick decided to apologize truly this time. He walked over, still nervous, holding 2 cups of coffee as a peace offering. But as he stepped onto Steven's lawn, another figure appeared behind him, his brother, Derek, who had just arrived from out of town. Derek was bigger, louder, and far more arrogant than Rick ever was. He had that same toxic pride that saw kindness as weakness. "So this is the guy who embarrassed you, huh?" Derek said, smirking. Rick's eyes widened. "No, Derek, it's not like that. I was wrong. He's Steven Seagal." But Derek didn't care. "I don't care if he's Superman," he barked. "Nobody puts my brother on the ground." Steven set down his broom slowly. "You should listen to your brother," he said in that calm, almost whispering voice. Derek laughed. "Oh, I'll listen to him after I teach you some manners." He stepped closer, cracking his knuckles, the crowd from nearby houses already peeking through their windows, sensing trouble. Steven sighed. "Violence won't teach anyone anything," he said. Derek smirked. "Then maybe you'll learn something today." Before Rick could stop him, Derek lunged forward with a wild swing. Time slowed. Steven moved so smoothly, it was like watching water flow around a rock. He sidestepped, caught Derek's arm midair, and redirected the momentum not with aggression, but precision. Derek hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out of him before he even realized what happened. Rick ran forward. "Derek, stop. You don't know what you're doing." But Derek wasn't listening. He jumped up, charging again. This time Steven didn't even touch him. He simply stepped aside, guiding him with a soft push that sent Derek tumbling face first into the grass. The onlookers gasped. Rick held his head in shame. Steven looked down at Derek, who was groaning on the ground. "You came here to protect your brother," Steven said softly. "That's good. But sometimes protecting someone means helping them become better, not fighting their battles." Derek looked up, sweat on his forehead, pride shattered. He finally understood. Rick stepped forward, voice trembling. "Mr. Seagal, I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know who you were, but that's not even the point. You didn't deserve how I treated you." Steven looked at him for a moment. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said quietly. "Respect shouldn't depend on fame. It should come from within." Rick nodded, eyes glassy. "You're right. I was angry at everyone, at myself, my job, my life, and I took it out on the wrong person." Steven placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then change it. Life's too short to let pride make you small." The words hit like thunder, simple but true. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Rick walked back home with Derek. They didn't say much, but both felt something new: humility. A few days later, Rick knocked again on Steven's door. This time, no anger, no tension. He was holding a small bonsai tree, a gift. "I thought you could use another one," he said with a shy smile. Steven smiled back faintly. "Bonsai grows best when you're patient with it," he said, accepting the plant. Rick nodded. "Yeah, I'm starting to learn that." From that day forward, the two men became unlikely friends. Rick helped Steven with small repairs around the house, and Steven taught him about balance both in life and in movement. One afternoon, Rick asked, "Why didn't you just hit me back that first day? You could have broken me in half." Steven chuckled softly. "Because strength isn't about how hard you hit," he said. "It's about how much you can take and still stay kind." Rick smiled. "Guess that's something I still need to work on." Steven nodded. "We all do." Word of their strange friendship spread around the neighborhood. People began stopping by, curious about the famous martial artist who tamed the loud neighbor. But Steven didn't care about fame. He cared that maybe, just maybe, his calmness had changed one life for the better. And it did. Rick never went back to being the angry man he once was. He stopped shouting, stopped picking fights, started listening. It was like the storm inside him had finally quieted, replaced by peace. Months later, one morning, Rick saw a group of teens bullying a smaller kid down the street. Before, he might have ignored it or even laughed, but not now. He ran over, stepping between them. "Hey, enough," he said firmly. The bullies sneered, ready to challenge him. But then something about his stance, calm, centered, balanced, made them pause. He wasn't angry, he was composed. He had learned from the best. The bullies backed off. The kid ran home safe. That night, Rick stopped by Steven's porch again. Steven looked up from his tea. "You did something good today," he said. Rick chuckled. "You heard about that already." Steven smiled faintly. "I didn't have to hear. I could feel it." Rick looked at him. The man who had once been his enemy, now his greatest teacher. "You know," he said, "I used to think power came from fear. Now I see it comes from peace." Steven nodded. "You've learned the hardest lesson there is." The two sat in silence, the sound of crickets filling the warm night air. And as the stars blinked above them, one thing became clear sometimes. The most powerful transformation doesn't come from punches or kicks, but from forgiveness. The arrogant neighbor who once punched Steven Seagal now spent his evenings beside him, not as rivals, but as friends, because in the end, power isn't in the fists. It's in the heart that chooses peace over pride.